Good morning. Welcome in on a Super Bowl Monday as the Chiefs go back-to-back. We are the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. We're driven by your next Ford F-150 truck, Mack Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. And our guests join us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. If you've listened to this show at all the last few years, I have told the story over and over again about when I was a kid, 9 years old, I watched the San Diego Chargers and the Miami Dolphins in an epic playoff game. And Dan Fouts was the quarterback. Eric Coryell was the head coach. Kellen Winslow Sr., the tight end. And it was a great game, and that's when I fell in love with the Chargers and Fouts and Eric Coryell and all the cool stuff that they were doing, Jefferson and so on. And so when Jason told me we were going to have the Hall of Famer, Oregon Duck, longtime San Diego Chargers QB on the show, I was really, really fired up. So good morning. Welcome in, Dan Fouts. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Bo. I always love it when a story begins with, when I was younger. But it's okay, man.
Look, yeah, I know you know this, but you were playing every week and you were in the heat of the battle. But we didn't get many games regardless of where you lived back then in the early 80s. And we're not but about 2.5, 3 hours from the New Orleans. And my aunt lived in New Orleans and she had season tickets, but the Saints weren't any good, Dan. So I saw y'all throw it around the yard. And we were still very 3 yards in a cloud of dust here in the South and Midwest and Northeast. And between Eric Coryell and Walsh and Lavelle Edwards, y'all were doing some cool stuff out west. And so that's why, and I thought your uniforms were cool, by the way, at 9 years old. So that's when I got hooked on kind of the way you played and the San Diego Chargers. And I want to start with that. What was it like to play for Eric Coryell and have so much success throwing the ball when so many teams were not doing that, Dan?
Well, because so many teams were not doing it, there was no defenses that were designed to stop it. And that's where we had the advantage because of Don Coryell's creativity and fearlessness to throw the ball. So when we would get a game plan on, say, Wednesday, we would just watch the film of our opponent coming up and put plays to match against it. And we get our confidence would just grow and grow, knowing that, well, when we put Winslow here, who's going to stop him? Okay, now we got Chandler, and with his abilities, who's going to stop him? So we knew going into a game that if we didn't turn it over and the quarterback didn't make stupid throws, that we're probably going to win the game.
So Johnny Unitas was, when you were drafted out of Oregon, and it's not the Oregon of the last 20 years with Bellotti and that whole run, and we can get into that in a minute, but you're drafted out of Oregon, which I think is the Pac-8 at that time, and Johnny Unitas is supposed to be the quarterback for the San Diego Chargers, but he gets hurt, right, early in the year?
Yeah, he did. He hurt his shoulder. Plus, remember, he was 40 years old. He'd already played 17 seasons with the Baltimore Colts, so he was really at the end of his rope. But unfortunately, he did hurt his shoulder, and that was the end of it. He only played in 4 games with the Chargers. And that, to me, was tragic because in just those 4 games, I learned so much watching him, talking to him, just bending his ear as much as I possibly could. And he was a great influence on me and taught me some very, very valuable lessons on how to play quarterback.
All right, expand on that a little bit. So you're a young guy. You're in the NFL. Johnny Unitas is already a Hall of Famer and played in the big games and so on. Were you like a sponge, Dan? Like if he could tell you anything about what you were about to go, and I guess at that point, you didn't know you were going to have, I'm sure you thought you were good, but you didn't know you were going to have this prolific career all the way through 1987 and end up in the Hall of Fame. What was that like as Unitas Unitas started telling you about the game and what to do at that position?
Well, not only was I a sponge, I was a pest. I couldn't get out of his shadow, so I just tried to soak up as much as I could, and really it was a lot of nuanced type of things about playing the position. When you break the huddle as you walk into the line of scrimmage, what are you looking for, Dan? Well, you should be looking here at this safety and seeing how he's lined up, and then check out the corners, see if they're inside shade or outside shade, or if they're 8 yards deep or bump and run. Just things like that give you a clue as to what the defense is going to try to do to stop you. So a lot of these things aren't taught by coaches because the coaches, very few of them, have played the position. And when you've played the position, you speak a different language, you have a different understanding, a different empathy. And, here I am, shadowing the greatest quarterback of all time.
How difficult or simplistic was Air Coryell's offense, Dan?
Well, it was kind of both. The numbering system made it simple, but the adjustments on the run made it very complex. And so we had to have intelligent receivers, and we did. You're talking about a Hall of Famer in Charlie Joyner and a Hall of Famer in Kellen Winslow, but don't forget about John Jefferson and, of course, Wes Chandler, who replaced Jefferson when Jefferson was traded to Green Bay, and all of a sudden we go, holy cow, Wes Chandler, he's better than JJ. So these guys, not only were they smart, they were unselfish, just wanting to win and knowing that if they made the right adjustments and read the defense the way I did as I was dropping back, then they were going to get the ball.
Hall of Famer Dan Fouts on the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Today it's commonplace, Dan, to see tight ends that are a big part of the offense. And obviously we just watched Kelsey last night. He's a great player. He's going to go to the Hall of Fame. Some people think he's the best ever. Kittle didn't have a great night, but he's a great player. And actually the final four teams, AFC, NFC, all had unbelievable tight ends. But it wasn't like that when you were coming through and coming up. But Coryell obviously understood how to leverage that position. Talk about how, because like Jason's 24 years old, so this is all he knows is these incredible tight ends putting up crazy numbers. Talk about how that came about, and Kellen, as good as Kellen Winslow was, and the fact that Coryell was using a tight end as basically a receiver / tight end.
Well, Coryell had Jackie Smith, a Hall of Famer, when he was coaching the St. Louis Cardinals. So a lot of the things that he brought to our team with Winslow was things he'd already done as a coach. So the biggest thing that you want to do in the NFL and throwing the ball is to try to create mismatches. And that's what we saw yesterday a lot of the times, especially in crunch time, is you move your tight end around. The defense tells you if somebody goes with him that it's going to be man-to-man. Now, that's what you want. If nobody moves when the tight end goes in motion, it's probably going to be zone, and that ain't bad either. If you've got the talent of a Winslow or a Jackie Smith or a Kelsey or whomever playing this position today. So that's what Coryell would do is find ways to create that mismatch, get Winslow outside wide as a wide receiver, move him in and out of the formation, and just find out where and how the defense is going to stop him.
Dan Fouts on the Out of Bounds Show, quarterback for the San Diego Chargers and the Oregon Ducks. Let's talk about Oregon. So they were not a powerhouse. What was your best? Do you remember what the best year record y'all had while you were there, Dan?
Yeah, in my sophomore year we were 6-4-1, which would have qualified for a bowl game. But back in those days, Bo, when you were young, there was no other bowl game except the Rose Bowl. So for the Pac-8, so we missed out there. But you got to remember that was before scholarship limitations, and so a team like SC would throw out the net, and it would be a big net, and they would bring in a bunch of players that never played at all for them. But what that happened is they take away from schools like Oregon or Washington State or Oregon State and Cal and Stanford. So that's why they were so dominant throughout those 60s and 70s.
Yeah, Bear Bryant did that here. He would have 140 people on scholarships, some on swimming, in other words, in other sports, and I can see Southern Cal doing that. Okay, so Oregon, I mean, at times they're okay, but at times they're not a good team. Rich Brooks comes in, and they give him a lot of time, and he starts getting something going and has some winning seasons, and it starts to build. Did you ever think that Oregon would build themselves into the winner that they are today through Rich Brooks and Bellotti, a little bit of Chip Kelly, and now what Dan Lanning's doing?
What happened is when Brooks took the Ducks to the Rose Bowl, and even though they lost to Penn State, that opened the eyes of a young man named Phil Knight. Okay? And Knight wants to win. Obviously, his company, Nike, has been one of the great American business success stories of all time. So he started getting more involved. Phil was a track runner at the University of Oregon, and so he had a lot of pride in the fact that he was a Duck, and he wanted to see the Ducks succeed. So once he opened up that wallet, that gave the coaches more ability to recruit. And then once Nike just started to take off, it was really a perfect marriage between a business and a athletic program.
When did you cultivate a relation? Or I guess you have. I'm assuming you're one of the greatest players to ever go through Oregon. You spent obviously a lot of time in San Diego. I don't know if he was paying attention then, but have you and Phil Knight cultivated a relationship over the years, Dan?
Yeah, we have. You see him at almost every Duck event, and so these are times where we can get together. I did, again, back when you were young, Bo. Some of us players, many players, had to work in the off season just to make ends meet, and I had a contract with Nike for the off season, and I gave them a couple of months of work, and I wasn't stocking shelves or anything, but it was still a job with Nike. So I did have that relationship way back when.
Okay, so when did that was that in the 70s or 80s when you were with the Chargers that you were working some with Nike?
That was late 70s.
Okay, so it hadn't quite taken off. I mean, they were doing well in the running space, but Jordan's the one that lifted the whole thing and became a global powerhouse. Do you live in Eugene, Oregon, Dan?
No, we live about 100 miles east of Eugene and near a town called Bend, Oregon, and it's on the dry side of the state, as we like to say, because the Cascade Mountains kind of protect us from a lot of rain. So it's a beautiful area in the country.
Okay, have you been there since you left San Diego in, I think it was 87?
Pretty much so, yeah.
Okay. What about broadcasting? You got into it. Did you like it? Talk a little bit about going from player to broadcasting.
Well, first of all, I loved it. And I spent, 34 years at it with CBS, then ABC, and back to CBS. My dad was the voice of the 49ers in San Francisco back in the 50s and 60s. So growing up, I was exposed to, not only the 49ers, but, when the Giants moved out and when the Warriors moved out, and it was all good because my dad was involved with all sports. And in fact, he's a Bay Area Radio Sports Hall of Famer. So
wow,
it's really a great way to grow up as a kid. You kidding me?
So Dan Fouts, Hall of Famer on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. So your dad was in broadcasting, and he is the play-by-play guy for the 49ers?
He certainly was, when players like Y.A. Tittle and Hugh McElhaney and Joe Perry and Bob St. Clair, Leo Nomalini. I could give you all the lineups because I used to quiz my dad as we drive to games, so he would be extra well prepared for the broadcast.
Wow. Okay, that's super cool. Dan Fouts on the Out of Bounds show. So you were in a world, not everybody, you grew up around pro sports, and that's most people do not grow up around pro sports. That had to be one of the coolest childhoods you could have, Dan.
Well, there's no question. Because of this job with the Niners, I got a couple of jobs with the Niners too. In fact, I was a ball boy for about 4 or 5 years, and I always wanted to be on the opponent's sideline, Bo, because I wanted to stand next to, see how big Butkus was, or see how short Johnny Unitas' crew cut was, just crazy things like that. And in those days, there was just, we only had 3 balls. Each ball boy on the sideline had 1 ball, and then the one that obviously that they're playing with. So it was a demanding job, believe me, but a lot of fun.
Dan Fouts on the Out of Bounds show. Okay, so you grow up around pro sports because your dad. Did Southern Cal recruit you, Dan?
Well, they kind of did. My team, St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco, we were a powerhouse, but it was mostly a running powerhouse of a team. We won the city championship in 1967, and 11 guys off our team got scholarships. And so a lot of guys were recruited as groups. And so I was recruited to go to visit SC with a couple other guys. But when the letters of intent came out, the other guys got their letter and I did not. So I was fortunate that I was recruited by Oregon by George Seifert, who became quite a famous coach. And that was my only scholarship offer, was from George Seifert and the Oregon Ducks.
Wow, Seifert takes over for Walsh, and Steve Young and George Seifert win a Super Bowl in the 90s. This is crazy.
He won two actually.
That's right, 2 Super Bowls in the 90s. Okay. Dan Fouts on the Out of Bounds show. Oregon Duck, Pro Football Hall of Fame, San Diego Chargers. And again, I fell in love with Eric Coryell and that offense, and Dan Fouts when I was a kid. We didn't get them all the time, but, man, when you got the Chargers, it was entertaining. And I thought Kellen Winslow Sr. was unbelievable too. Okay, let's talk about your acting career with Adam. What was it like to hang out with Adam Sandler and be in The Waterboy?
It was cool. Okay, he is a very cool cat. And working with Brent at the time was great because, Brent Musburger was just one of the all-time greats. And so it was a point when we were filming and it wasn't going very well. The script was kind of stilted. And Adam said to us, he said, well, let's stop now. Let me ask you guys, you do this every Saturday, right? And obviously we said, yeah, we do. That's our job. And he said, well, just do your job. I'll tell you what the scene is, and you just describe the scene as if you were there. And so we did, and we ad-libbed most of that whole script, which made it a lot more fun and a lot more natural. And, I got the chance to tell Brent Musburger to shut up, which was awesome.
That is so cool that you were in an Adam Sandler movie, man.
I still get royalty checks too, and sometimes they're $15, $20. Sometimes they're 15 or 20 cents, but I still get them.
That is so awesome. All right, last one. Dan Fouts, what a treat to have him on the show. You're listening to ESPN 105.9 The Zone. All right, Musburger. He's one of my favorite of all time. And I heard him last week on the Dan Patrick Show, and he's obviously all into Vegas and the sports betting and tied in with the Raiders. When are you and Musburger friends? How much have you been around him, Dan?
Oh, absolutely friends. He's one of the most genuine guys you'll ever meet. You're gonna have a good time when you're with Brent, and we do stay in touch as much as we possibly can. It's really tempting when we do talk on the phone, and he won't let me get a word in edgewise to just tell him to shut up again. But it's all in good fun.
I love it. Well, Dan, thanks so much for your time today. As a kid, I loved watching you play. Of course, I saw you on TV for years, broadcasting. Did not know that your dad was tied in with the 49ers and in the San Francisco Bay Area Hall of Fame because of that. That is unbelievable. I've got a friend that we have on the show all the time. His name's Dave Bartu, and he's all into college football and NFL analytics. And we met 13, 14 years ago, and we call him the numbers nerd. Great guy. He lives outside of Portland, and he went to Oregon. He's a Duck too, and he went to Oregon. I think he started at Oregon in 1990, and maybe graduated in 94 or something. But we've been able to ride that wave, and then of course, Rich Brooks, Bilotti, and the rest is history. So, Dan, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it, and congratulations on all the success.
Thanks, Bo. Thanks for having me on.
Dan Fouts, former San Diego Charger quarterback, Hall of Famer on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. I may be done for the week.
That was awesome.
He's awesome.
that was and just to hear the way that he was like, defenses couldn't prepare for us.
No,
like that's awesome.
What? Don Coryell was playing chess, while others in the league were playing checkers.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a few of them. He and Walsh, and a couple of more. Again, innovative, creative. What he did with Kellen Winslow is, they weren't really talking about mismatches back then.
Yeah,
and he was unguardable. That's all because of what's happened the last 30 years in the game, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And what we saw last night with Kelsey, and what we've seen with Gronk and Kittle at times, and everybody else. And the last four tight ends, maybe there's something to this. The last four tight ends standing were all unbelievable, right?
That's true.
They were.
Yeah.
But that was a treat. So if you missed anything today, I thought Jeff Duncan was awesome too on the NFL, and Chris Jones and Steve McNair and Eli Manning. But if you missed anything, we're on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Search Out of Bounds with Bo Bounds. And Dan Fouts was brought to you by your next Nissan Pathfinder or Nissan Rogue at Cannon Nissan in Jackson. And don't forget that the Keg House is open all week. 41 beers, muffalettas, gumbo, right there on Highway 51 by Casadoras. Thanks for listening to the show. Powered and driven by Rick's Pro Truck in Gluckstadt. RPT, ricksprotruck.com. We will see you tomorrow.